Hello, my name is Tucker Cutter. I'm a manager in BerryDunn's higher education practice, and I'm here with Mike Carlin, Vice Chancellor of IT and CIO at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and Clint Davies, the principal of our higher education practice. Today, we're going to talk about Charlotte's transition to OneIT and the trials, tribulations, and successes they've experienced along the way. So I'm going to set the stage here with a few slides, and then I'll turn it over to Clint to facilitate the Q&A. So without further ado, I will pull up the slides and we'll get going. All right. So OneIT, trials, tribulations, and successes. So UNC Charlotte has experienced significant enrollment growth over the past 10 to 15 years. And along with that growth, they've experienced really increased research portfolio. The IT organization has had to expand to meet the increased needs for service, and it's become increasingly complex to meet the service needs of the institution. And so like many other institutions across the country, there's been increased awareness for information security and risk, and much more scrutiny around that, all the way from faculty to the board. And so leadership came together and decided that they wanted to come up with a plan and a more cohesive approach for IT across the institution. So this started back in 2017 when the chancellor announced that they had engaged us, BerryDunn, to take a look at the IT organization, so including central IT and distributed ITS, and really come up with a plan. So what could be the future approach going forward? And so from December through April of 18, we did an assessment looking at all of the IT organizations across campus and engaged 7 other peer institutions to really understand how they're approaching this challenge. In July of 18, we presented our findings to the cabinet, really about a hybrid approach and how that would be the best approach we thought going forward to serve the institution. And they liked that idea, but they really wanted to take it to the next level to say, what does this mean for each IT unit? What does this mean for each IT staff? How is this going to affect every individual on campus and in the IT organization? So over the next 5 to 7 months, we dove down to the next level to say, really, what does this mean for each individual? What are they doing currently? What will they be doing in the future? And what services will they be providing? And so that's where we were at EDUCAUSE of 2019. We had just sort of did that analysis and put our recommendations together for the chancellor. And then since January 20th, it was January of 2020, the chancellor has made his decisions on the path forward. And since July of 2020, OneIT is fully operational. And here we are in September of 2020 today. And so we really want to give you an update on what's happened since OneIT has been implemented. And to set the stage a little bit, at a high level, the changes made, there's been one IT organization, all IT staff reporting up through the CIO, Mike, who's on the call. There's 4 new leadership positions that really are designed to bring together the distributed IT and the central IT. And there were 4 enterprise level service teams created. So looking at service desk, desktop support, endpoint management, and servers and storage. And so now these services are provided to the entire university by one team. And that's not to say that these are the only teams providing enterprise services. Teams such as the network team had been doing that previously, and it just refined a little bit, but these were the new ones. Prior to the changes, there were 120 staff in central IT and 170 IT staff across 23 units across the university providing IT services. Now there are 247 IT staff in OneIT. And for those of you that are quick at math, that's a 43 position discrepancy. And we found that there are 43 individuals that were IT classified, but really weren't actually providing what we decided were IT services throughout the assessment. And so those individuals had remained doing the same responsibilities in their units. And the last point here before I turn it over to Mike and Clint, you'll notice that OneIT is in a gray box, and it is a different color than either the central ITS or the local IT units. And that was something that was very important. The IT units didn't want to feel like they were being pulled in ITS or vice versa. So it needed to be very clear that this was actually a new IT organization that was being formed. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mike and Clint, and they can walk you through some of the specifics about the trials, tribulations, and successes.
Thank you, Tucker. So, Mike, we've got a series of questions we thought we would go through, and we thought we'd start by hearing your perspective on progress since you've moved forward with OneIT.
Sure. So as you heard from Tucker, in January of this year, of 2020, the Chancellor officially adopted and accepted the recommendations to move forward with OneIT. At that time, we created a series of working groups because really a lot of these things are the details matter, right? We know that it's complicated stuff. So we developed 4 working groups to help us to plan out what OneIT will look like and how we need to operate this. And those teams were co-chaired. We intentionally did this. We created one person from the IT group, an ITS employee at the time who serve in these functional areas and really know those areas well. But we also then put another co-chair from another functional area. So the 4 working groups that we created are finance. As you can imagine, that one is extremely complicated and very nuanced in details that matter there. Human resources, communications, and service delivery. So a lot of the service delivery touched on the areas that were enterprise services that became enterprise services, and really working to bring these groups together from what had previously been distributed teams and bring them into OneIT. Again, as Tucker mentioned, it was extremely important that we created a new organization. We weren't assuming or consuming another group. We created a brand new organization. The other thing that we did is we've been able to hire several of the business relationship leaders. So you'll hear us talk about business relationship leaders. Those are the 4 senior positions that Tucker referred to. And really what came out of the work that we did was we determined that we needed someone to be the strategic leader for various areas. So we have BRLs one for the colleges, one for academic services and support areas. Think of enrollment management, grad school, areas like that. Then we have them for one for the business affairs area, which is a very large area on campus, obviously, and then one for student affairs, athletics as well. So there's 4 in total, and their job is to be the advocate for those areas, to be the leaders for those areas, to work with the teams. And those 4 positions, report to me. 2 of the people were already on campus fulfilling those roles in some capacity. So we already had 2 people. And then we filled it with 2 others as an interim basis. As we all know, we're all going through COVID right now. So conducting a national search to fill these 2 vacancies, we decided to kind of table that for the time being, and we conducted an internal search. And those were filled in the August timeframe. We did an extensive internal application process, so effectively everybody in OneIT could apply. We did that intentionally, and we went through a normal interview process. And we were successful, and this has allowed us, frankly, to move forward in these uncertain times. The other thing is, of course, BRL doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. We work with Gartner to try to create another title. I'm not sure it rolls off the tongue either, but they are now called Executive Directors of Digital Strategy. I still go back to BRL because that's what we called them for 2 years, but their new title that they prefer is Executive Director of Digital Strategy.
Thank you, Mike. I know there's an incredible amount of work that's gone into this process. For institutions that are considering this effort, what would you describe as perhaps the most important 1 or 2 keys for success?
Wow, so 1 or 2. I would say that probably, it goes without saying, but I will say it anyway, is the executive sponsorship is at the highest levels, is absolutely critical. We were quite fortunate at UNC Charlotte to have a chancellor who is now retired. Hopefully this is not the cause of his retirement, this OneIT initiative, but he retired this year. But he understood the value of this and really was looking at this as a way to advance the university to our next level. And so having him be a strong advocate for that, and frankly being the project sponsor. But it also was very important that we had support from our chief financial officer, from our provost. If you don't have really the support of those 3 people at a minimum, it's going to be extremely difficult to move forward, in my opinion, if not impossible to succeed. I think one of the lessons also learned was having one decision maker was key. In this situation, it happened to be the chancellor himself, because as you can imagine, even with the best efforts and the best consultants that came in and came on board, there's going to be decisions that have to be made. And the chancellor was able to weigh those, have discussions with the cabinet, explain what he was thinking, get feedback, and then make a decision. And that was extremely useful. The other thing that I found particularly useful as well is being able to present this over the 2 years to the Board of Trustees. So most campuses have some form of a board. We, of course, have a Board of Trustees here at UNC Charlotte. And they were extremely supportive of this initiative, and keeping them updated on this was important. I remember times where I would present to the Board of Trustees and they would actively say, Mike, what do you need from us? What can we do to make this successful for you and for the campus? So I found that to be extremely important. I think probably last and but not least by any means is comes down to transparency and communication. That is something you cannot underestimate how much effort that is going to take. It is absolutely necessary. It can frankly be emotionally draining at times because it's change, and many people don't like change. And so doing that communication, having town halls, doing emails, doing drop-ins at dean's meetings, at faculty council, whatever it is, basically communicating every single place that you can and have it possible, and having an excellent communication strategy with that. Hopefully, if you have a team you can work with, they can help keep on top of that. But it was extremely beneficial for us to be able to leverage that, and frankly, to point out in the end that everybody got a chance to hear the proposal multiple times, multiple opportunities for input, and that was extremely important.
Boy, that certainly is true. Gaining support for change and gaining the coalition of sponsors and being able to communicate well and transparently is essential in an effort like this. And this is higher education, so there's a lot of different viewpoints that come into play. What did you do to help get those viewpoints aligned in the course of all this effort?
So that was honestly one of the challenges. As you know, I mean, Tucker and Clint, you were there with us and went through this journey with us. I think that what we found was once we focused on a service-based approach, I think things started to click for us. I think people started to understand that. So what do we mean? What do I mean by a service-based approach? Rather than just completely shaking up the organization and blending everybody and moving teams and moving people, what we really settled on was, okay, what are some of the common good services that are really difficult for people to argue that they need as a unique service in their area? And so we were able to identify 4. Now you could argue there might be others, but these were really straightforward, and everybody frankly agreed that these were common good areas that didn't necessitate unique solutions in departments. So those 4 service areas were the service desk, also known in some areas as the help desk, desktop support services, endpoint solutions. So endpoint solutions is a branch of the client engagement, and they're the ones who work on automation and security and patching on the endpoint devices themselves, and servers and storage. And I shouldn't point out that servers and storage is distinct from maybe research computing and other areas, but that's kind of a separate topic. But those are the 4. And once we identified those, people really started to kind of rally around this idea of, okay, I can get behind that. I understand that this is a service area, and we could better leverage the resources the campus has in teams. And I think it especially spoke to groups in areas that maybe only had 1 or 2 staff members, where they kind of were a jack of all trades, if you will. And they were doing a little bit of everything, and they started to understand how this might benefit them. The other thing that really resonated with certainly with many of the leaders in the distributed areas, was that by doing this, by becoming OneIT, the staff were going to get better opportunities for professional development. Many of the staff, frankly, had perhaps at best described as inconsistent professional development opportunities, or at worst, they didn't get any, either because their supervisor didn't necessarily know how to help them or help develop them. They weren't exposed to other groups and other peers and ways of kind of thinking and doing new things. And so staff in small units just were not receiving that in a consistent way. And the OneIT organization provides more of these opportunities. And that was one of the things that really resonated, especially with the deans. They kind of recognized that they wanted to do right by their employees and they wanted to help them. And this was a way to do that.
Thank you. Mike, you've talked about some of the challenges. One of the challenges that emerged, which we've talked about before, has been the financial component of making this change. And are you able to share some of the complexities, at least, that you had to deal with in the course of this process?
I certainly can. And I think my first statement to anybody who's listening is do not underestimate the complexity. I thought I had a pretty good handle of the complexities until I sat down with that finance working group that I mentioned earlier, one of those 4 working groups that were established. And it is its own domain for sure. It is a specialty area. It is extremely complex. And so as an example, one of the things that we had kind of naively perhaps assumed when we first started was that we were going to move the personnel dollars. So if you're an IT professional and you're in this distributed area, when OneIT went effective on July 1, we would simply move your funding dollars over to OneIT. Well, in practice, that sounds easy, certainly for general funded positions alike, but we have a lot of what our campus calls kind of colors of money. And those might be considered like fee-funded areas or grant-funded areas, and there are very specific rules that actually keep you from just shifting those dollars around. And so how do you then navigate an employee who's now part of your organization, but the money is sitting perhaps in student affairs? How do you navigate that? How do you work through that? Especially right now at a time of potential budget cuts that campuses are facing. What would happen if student affairs says, I need that money now to, make my cuts, and that IT position goes away? And so we've had to really navigate what that means. And one of the things kind of the foreshadowing for that is we knew that this might occur. We didn't anticipate COVID, but we knew that this might occur. And so that was part of getting the chancellor to really set the stage for what that service level agreement was going to be between OneIT and other areas where money was still going to remain. And so making it very clear, for instance, that yes, the money is in your area. It can't be moved for some number because of certain rules. But we challenge them to kind of think of it like money that's in escrow. They can see it, but they can't touch it. Now, we'll see how that navigates. And then over time, the hope is, and the expectation is that as opportunities present themselves, we might swap those funds. So we might take those T-funded dollars and swap them for general funds that are more easily transferable. Some of the other things that we came across that were, again, a little bit of surprise. We knew about it, but until I saw the data, it was a challenge, was equity adjustments. So a desktop support person who had been part of the central IT versus a desktop support person who is part of a distributed area like student affairs or some other group, they had surprisingly different salaries. And so the structure and how that was approached for the salary structures were very different. And so we have a lot of equity issues now that have come up, and that had to be part of our calculations when we were presenting this. So, the big takeaway is that at least for our scenario on the campus, this was not a cost-saving exercise. In fact, it actually cost us some money because we had to figure out how we're going to adjust those equity issues, how we're going to pay for perhaps some new positions that we needed to address some span of control issues and some new management areas. So we needed new positions as well, like the 2 BRLs that I was referring to. And there was also salary increases that were necessary for people who were simply taking on additional roles. I mean, there are some staff who were managing an area, and literally July 1, it doubled in staff. It went from 17 people to 34 people. And so how do you address those? Now, of course, all of this has been made more complex by the times we find ourselves in, but we're navigating it.
Well, that certainly is true. And, you talked about the financial complexities, but over the long term, it'll be worth it. I know that was one of the drivers, was to be able to gain more efficiencies over time. and this new organization will do that. Being mindful of our time here, now that you've been navigating COVID-19, we've all been navigating it for some number of months, and how has OneIT helped or impacted the response efforts to dealing with the pandemic?
So again, while officially we began July 1 with the OneIT organization, that was really the mechanics behind it. So the changes in our ERP solution and HR and other things. But the planning began in January and continued on even through as we went through COVID. And I can tell you that I was extremely pleased with the outcome. This new organization allowed us to leverage all of our IT resources in a very managed way and to support a common goal. And if we had not been OneIT or moving towards OneIT at that time, what would have happened, frankly, is we would have had, there would have been a series of uncoordinated efforts by individual units, departments, and others, some of which, frankly, don't have a lot of resources. And so it would have been extremely disjointed and challenging. And I think that because of the efforts already underway, because of the conversations we were having about how do we deliver services to the campus, we were extremely successful, and we're really, quite frankly, able to rotate and pivot very quickly to deliver remote access, to work through any of the issues, to figure out security issues, access to different systems on campus, off campus, being able to get computers where they needed to be. So we had staff members who perhaps didn't have them. And no longer did you have to worry about a single group having to figure it out. It was OneIT trying to figure out where those computers needed to go. And as a result, we were able to move extremely rapidly. And I was extremely pleased. And that speaks to the agility that we talked about. And it was a perfect example of that agility made us successful in what are constantly changing times, frankly.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's been really helpful to hear you talk about the story. Of course, Tucker, Mike, and I've been living this for the last 3 years, but you've accomplished a tremendous amount. My final question before I turn it back to Tucker is would you do this again?
I think the answer is absolutely yes, I would. I think it is a worthwhile effort. I think you need to go into it with eyes open and be honest with what the outcomes are going to be. But I think if you do that and you have the right support, and above all, you have patience, you will be extremely successful in this.
Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us, and I know there's more topics, questions people may have about this. We'll turn it back to Tucker, and you've got contact information. If people do have follow-up questions, we certainly would entertain them.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Clint. Again, really appreciate going through this. And I think we'd be happy to entertain any questions, as Clint mentioned. So our emails are on the screen. So please reach out if you have any questions. And thank you for watching.
Thank you.